Hey, it's Drybear. And just like I figured, we got some last minute dungeon tuning for the Season 3 of Dragonflight Mythic Plus rotation. There was a couple dungeons that were really problematic, specifically Throne of the Tides, and some that were way too easy, like Atal'Dazar. So let's run through the changes so we know what's going on and we know what dungeons we can run this week to push the highest keys. Starting with Atal'Dazar, the required enemy forces count for Atal'Dazar has been increased. And I think they specifically did this because a lot of the intermediary enemies between the three areas outside of the center platform were just being ignored completely, and you actually would skip over quite a lot of trash going through this. So I think they just wanted people to include a little bit more of those rotations when they're pushing through so they don't skip too much of the dungeon as they go around. The Toxitsara's Leaping Thrash no longer triggers poisoned claws on the target, which reduces the amount of damage that those small packs give. And thankfully, one of the few hard areas of the dungeon, which is just inside to the left, is all those big trolls, those Elori trolls that you face. The Dazari Juggernaut Merciless Assault damage reduced by 25%. The Augur's Wildfire periodic rate reduced to 1 second from 2 seconds, which means that the overall damage is going to come down because you couldn't really avoid the Merciless Assault, but Wildfire can be cleansed and is usually only on one or two people at a time, which means that the controllable damage is a little bit more in the player's favor. Dinomancer Kisho's Deadeye aim damage got reduced by 25%. In most routes, you usually skipped this mob, but it's nice to know that if you do decide to pull it, or if you get pulled on accident, you won't get bursted as hard, especially on high fortified. Palanja's Frenzy Charge is now avoidable, but inflicts increased damage, so you can actually dodge this now, which is pretty cool. Monzumi's Wild Thrash range got increased to 100 yards, so this one is also going to be something that's a little bit more of a threat. In a shocking turn of events, Yasma, the final boss, the cast that she does, Racking Pain, can no longer be interrupted and is no longer a curse effect when it's inside of a Mythic Keystone difficulty. So this is something that got kicked a lot, and it is a big portion of her damage output. So now that it can no longer be kicked, it's not a curse effect, which means that anyone can deal with it, but it is going to be regular damage and regular difficulty added to the pull that wasn't there before. For Priestess, Alunza on the west side, Corrupted Blood inflicts damage every 2.5 seconds instead of 3 seconds, so it ticks a little bit more frequently, and the Spirit of Gold's health has been increased by 33%. Usually it will only take about 1 or 2 CCs to get through this mob, especially even on the keys that were available now. And I'm not even sure on Tyrannical, maybe this extra health means that you might have to use 3 or 4 CCs to get through it, but it makes it a little bit more of a challenge and something that you don't just ignore. Next is Murozond Rise, which was easily one of the hardest. I would say it would be the second hardest dungeon in week 1 to complete. Some of the boss fights were absolutely ridiculous. For the first boss, Tyr the Infinite Keeper, Radiant Barrier damage absorb got reduced by 15%. This is when he pops up and gets the orbs. He gets a whole bunch of absorb, which slowed the fight down, especially on Tyrannical. And the refresh damage got reduced by 25% as well. Time Stream Anomaly's Untwist damage reduced by 20%, and Time Displacement reduces the creature's health by an additional 10%, and on death damage effect reduced by 50%. As well as his Double Strike and Triple Strike, the cooldown got increased. And remember, it was already a problem on Fortify week last week. On Tyrannical, he's just as much of a problem. Then the last boss, Chronoloord Dios, which was very difficult for some comps depending on how they dealt with magical damage. His health got reduced by 10%. It's helpful in the second phase of the fight when you're just burning him down. There's a lot of mechanics going on. And Infinite Corruption damage got reduced by 20% as well. And this helps some of the comps that really just couldn't keep up with the length of the fight or the amount of damage that you take. And some healers struggled a lot with this as well. So this is going to be a really nice change. Next is Throne of the Tides, which to me was the hardest dungeon last week and was very clearly overtuned. It wasn't even a question whether or not it was going to get nerfed. It was just a matter of when. And the biggest problem in this dungeon was the Gauntlet with the Unstable Corruptions. That's the first change we're going to see here. Reduce the total number of Unstable Corruption spawns, and Unstable Corruption now spawn more consistently in the Abyssal Hall. So the total number is lower and they're a little bit more regular, which means that you can plan around them. I still think that they probably should just not be infinite at all, just a certain amount, or maybe just make them a specific, like bring them closer to the center so you can skip past them, but at least the total number is coming down, which is helpful. Vicious Snapdragon's Razor Jaws inflicts damage every 1.5 seconds instead of every 1 second. This is for groups that can't CC them properly or just is stuck in a bad spot, especially in the low keys where you have a pug or people just getting into Mythic Plus. On the focus fire from these things, they can do so much damage that people just die, and their health got reduced by 20% as well. And the same thing goes for Gil Globlin's Aquamage. The health got reduced, but more importantly, their Their Aqua Blast cast time got increased to 4 seconds from 3.5 seconds. This Aqua Blast hits so unbelievably hard. It is a must kick, must CC from these things on high keys. The Tainted Guardian, which is the giant elementals in that gauntlet, their swell damage has been reduced by 15%. The major problem here was when you get a bunch of the unstable corruption debuffs on you and scales that damage up by a lot, but reducing the overall damage is definitely going to help. And the other major problem child in this dungeon is the Nazjar Sentinels that you find in the hallways leading up to the first and second half of the dungeon. They have a tank buster and a lot of health, but the biggest problem is they cast a spell called Crushing Depth, which puts a fat 30-second frost dot on someone, and they get a massive heal absorb on them as well. And if you don't heal through all of it, they keep getting burned for more and more damage. And this on high keys, especially on fortified, became a major problem. So while the dot damage is staying the same, the heal absorb amount got reduced by 15%, which is a nice change. For the final boss, Azumat, which was easily the hardest in the dungeon, Blotting Barrage damage got reduced by 15%. Blotting Darkness inflicts damage reduced by 25%. Neptulon's Cleansing Flux duration increased to 12 seconds instead of 10 seconds, which helps you cleanse the ink that's on the ground. It gives you a little bit more time to do that. Foul Bolt now has an 8-second initial cool up, which means that it doesn't go off right away, which is nice. And Splotch spawns closer to the ink of Azumat, which really helps with gathering them up, considering that the tank can't leave melee range or you start getting the boss going bonkers. Galakrond's Fall was about average in difficulty last week, and we're seeing some changes there as well. The Risen Dragon's Necrotic Outburst inflicts damage every 3 seconds instead of every 2 seconds, which gives you a little bit more time to heal and more time for heal over time effects to get through this kind of burn. And the Coalesced Moments Tainted Sands no longer does damage immediately, and its duration has been reduced to 7 seconds instead of 9 seconds, which again, on fortified or specifically really big pulls, it means that certain healers that aren't the top meta healers are going to have an easier time getting through these checks. For Darkheart Thicket, Oakheart's Crushing Grip throw damage has been reduced by 15% since you're already taking damage before he throws you anyway. This means that if you had cooldowns down as a tank, you're not going to get one-shot by the whole process. You're going to take some damage from the dot and the damage from the grab, and then eventually take damage from the throw itself, but the throw won't do as much as it did before. Maddening Roar damage the Maddening Roar buff has had its bonus reduced as well per stack from 25% to 20%, and I think this is just for high keys where fortified pulls take a long time, and this can keep stacking and stacking and stacking until the damage is actually insane. For Black Rook Hold, a change that I didn't think was ever going to happen even since Legion, but the Fellspite Dominators have an ability called Sick Bats, as well as a cast that can give bonus damage to them and nearby allies, but during this gauntlet, you'll have infinitely spawning bats until you reach the end, and the Dominators can have the bats focus fire one target and do damage to that target, which, depending on the CC and the team comp that you had available, became very difficult to deal with, and they've limited how many bats get triggered by this. So when they cast Sick Bats, which is a focus fire marker on one of your teammates, it will now only send up to 4 bats maximum to that target instead of unlimited. So if you decide to pull the whole gauntlet at once and you have 30 fell bats walking around and someone gets Sick Bats, they won't get one shot by each of the 30 bats hitting once. And lastly, for Waycrest Manor, Matron Alma's Lingering Dread should now prefer non-tank players as often as it can, and this, especially since I play a lot of tank this season, I am super happy to see this because it would go on the tank almost every single cast, which was super annoying and meant positioning was really weird. That's what we got for balance tuning for Mythic Plus Season 3 Dragonflight. Let me know what you think still needs to have happen inside of the game down below in the comments. There's definitely some changes that I would like to see. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.